The year was 1867, and the wind that swept across the high plains carried the smell of rain and the restless cry of coyotes. She walked that lonely stretch of earth with her head bowed against the storm, skirts whipping around her legs, boots sinking into the mud where the prairie met the river's edge. To most, she was just a girl, though the hard years behind her had carved away any trace of childhood. She had been left to herself since her folks were buried in shallow ground by the cottonwoods, and the ranch they once tended had fallen quiet. Now she scraped out a living mending fences, tending a meager garden, and doing the work no one else would touch. She had little, but she had learned to live with little. What she did not expect on that storm-split evening was to find death itself sprawled in her path. At first she thought it was a deer brought down by a hunter, lying twisted at the bank where water had gouged its channel through sand and stone. But as she drew closer, she saw the shape of a man. He lay half buried in silt, his dark hair plastered against his brow, his chest rising in shallow bursts that looked ready to quit. Lightning split the sky, and in that brief blaze, she caught the sight of blood soaked into buckskin and beads glimmering faintly beneath the grime. This was no drifter, no cowboy left to rot. This was a man of the plains, paint still faint on his face, medicine pouch tied at his neck. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Every story she had heard as a child rushed back with the thunder. Warriors sweeping down, homesteads burning, women screaming as arrows flew. Her father had spoken of raids. Her mother whispered of vengeance. And here, sprawled at her feet, was one of them, a chief if the markings told true. She could leave him to die. She should leave him to die. But she stood there, rain soaking through her dress, and could not move. The man groaned, a low sound torn from his chest, and she saw the wound then just beneath his ribs. The ball had gone clean through, leaving an ugly tear. He was alive, though not for long if she turned her back. She swallowed hard, torn between every lesson of fear she'd ever known and the stubborn will that had kept her alive this long. The wind pushed at her, urging her on, but her boots held fast in the mud. She crouched beside him, pressed her hand to the wound, and felt the hot rush of blood spill through her fingers. He flinched, tried to speak, but the words broke apart in his throat. She didn't understand the language, but she understood desperation well enough. The storm growled above, and in that moment she made her choice. She looped her arms beneath his shoulders, dragged him inch by inch from the river's edge, every muscle in her back screaming with the effort. He was heavy, heavier than she had strength for, but she kept moving, boots slipping, teeth clenched, refusing to let go. By the time her shack came into view, the rain was falling in sheets. Smoke curled weakly from the chimney where she'd left a fire. She shoved the door open with her hip, pulled him inside, and dropped him onto the narrow cot that had been her father's. He coughed once, body twisting, before falling still. She slammed the door shut, bolted it, and stood there breathing hard, staring at the stranger she had just dragged into her only shelter. The fire threw light across his face, catching the lines of age, the proud set of his jaw, even in weakness. She could see now the detail of his beadwork, the eagle feather tangled in his hair, the scars on his hands. This was no common warrior. This was someone of weight among his people, which meant that if they found him here, found him with her, she would be branded enemy, guilty without trial. She pressed her palms against her skirt, shaking. She should have left him by the river. The thought circled her mind like a hawk. Yet when he moaned again, a sound of raw pain, she reached instinctively for the small chest beneath the table where she kept scraps of cloth needles and the little whiskey she spared for medicine. Her hands worked without her permission, tearing strips, dabbing at the wound, pouring liquor that made him jolt awake for a heartbeat before sinking back. His skin burned with fever. She whispered under her breath, half a prayer, half a curse. The storm raged against the roof. She fed the fire higher, crouched beside him, and forced herself not to think of the danger waiting beyond the walls. Every sound of hoofbeats she imagined in the rain, every flicker of shadow made her clutch the rifle propped by the door. Still she worked, binding him tight, cleaning as best she could. His life bled into her rags, and she wondered why she fought so hard to keep it. Her mind drifted unwillingly to the past. She had been no older than 12 when she watched her father fall beneath arrows. Her mother struck down beside the barn. She had hidden in the hayloft with her baby brother clutched to her chest, silent as the grave, until morning found her alone. The baby had not lasted through that winter. The years since had hollowed her into something harder, sharper, a girl with no family but the land itself. And now here she was, saving a man whose people had taken everything. He stirred, muttered words she could not catch. She leaned close, hearing only fragments, a name perhaps, a plea. His hand twitched, reaching weakly for the pouch at his chest. She guided it there, let him clutch the small leather bundle. Whatever was in it gave him calm, for he settled back, breathing shallow but steady. Hours crept by. She dozed, upright against the wall, rifle across her lap. The rain eased to a drizzle, and the silence that followed was worse than the storm. When the fire popped, she started awake. The night pressed close, thick with unseen eyes. She rose, moved to the window, and peered out through the slats. Nothing but darkness and the endless sigh of wind. Still, her gut nodded. Someone was out there. She returned to the cot. The chief's eyelids fluttered, then opened. His gaze fixed on her with startling clarity. For a long moment he said nothing, only studied her face, the dirt on her cheeks, the weariness in her eyes. Then he whispered one word, heavy with meaning though she did not know its sound. It might have been a name or a vow. She shook her head, not understanding, but the intensity in his gaze rooted her to the floor. His hand lifted weakly, brushing the air as though to ward her away, or perhaps to thank her. She caught it, pressed it down gently, and whispered, "Rest. That's all you can do." He did not understand her tongue, yet he seemed to accept the tone, for his eyes closed once more. She sat back, every nerve on edge. The night stretched thin, silence broken only by his ragged breathing and the crackle of the fire. Then, faint and distant, she heard it, a long, mournful howl rolling across the hills. Wolves hunting in the dark. Another joined it, closer, sharper. She gripped the rifle, heart pounding. The chief slept on, unaware. She kept her eyes on the door, on the window, listening to the cries echo nearer. The fire guttered low. She threw the last of her wood on it, sparks jumping into the gloom. Smoke curled along the rafters. Her pulse throbbed in her ears as the howls rose again, circling, pressing close. Out there, predators waited, drawn by the scent of blood and weakness. Inside, she guarded a man whose very presence could bring more danger than any wolf. Still she did not open the door. Still she did not drag him back into the mud. She stayed planted, rifle steady, breath sharp, watching over a stranger who might destroy her come dawn. And as the night deepened and the wolves cried again, she knew her life had already shifted, the ground beneath her feet tilting toward something she could not yet name. The man on her cot was more than wounded flesh. He was the spark of a fire she had not meant to light, and outside her walls, the darkness pressed closer, waiting. Dawn spilled over the plains like a slow bleed of gold across ash. She woke stiff in the chair, rifle still balanced across her lap, neck aching from sleep's cruel angle. The fire had burned down to embers, gray smoke curling in tired threads. For a moment she thought the night had been a dream, that the man on the cot was no more than fevered imagination. But then she heard his breath, steady though shallow, and saw the way the blanket rose and fell against his chest. He lived still against reason. She rose quietly, joints protesting, and crossed to the window. The storm had washed the world clean. The prairie grass bent beneath a wind gentler than the one that had battered her roof hours earlier. Yet what drew her, I was not the calm, but the marks pressed into the soft earth beyond her door. Hoof prints, a dozen at least, circling, pausing, moving on. Her stomach tightened. They had been here, watching, maybe still were. She stepped back, fingers tightening on the rifle. He had not come alone to that riverbank. Whoever had shot him might be hunting still, or his own people might already know where he had crawled to fall. Either way, her shack was no fortress. A few boards, and a rifle would not hold long if they chose to come. The man stirred. She turned, saw his eyelids flutter. His mouth moved without sound, his hand clutching again at the pouch tied against his chest. She knelt beside him, poured a trickle of water between his cracked lips. His throat worked, then his eyes opened, darker than coal, sharp despite the fever. They fixed on her, and for an instant she felt as though he saw straight through her skin to the marrow beneath. He whispered something low, a name perhaps, then coughed, blood flecking his lips. She wiped it away, anger rising unbidden. "What am I doing?" she muttered, half to herself, half to him. "Keeping you alive just to bring my death down with it?" He blinked, not understanding. Yet when she pressed her hand lightly against his shoulder, urging him to lie back, he obeyed. There was a dignity even in his weakness, a weight to him that unsettled her. Hunger gnawed her belly. She had eaten little a day before. The chief would need broth, maybe more cloth for dressings, and her stores were nearly gone. That meant the trading post. She hated the thought. The men there eyed her with suspicion, a girl alone with no kin, no husband, surviving when many had failed. They whispered about her in corners, called her wild, cursed worse. She avoided them when she could. Now she had no choice. She saddled her mule, eyes scanning the horizon for movement. None came, though she felt the prickle of unseen eyes. She left the chief with the rifle laid within reach, though she doubted he could lift it, and rode out. The trail to the post wound through rolling grasslands still wet with rain. Mud sucked at the mule's hooves. Birds scattered in sharp bursts of wings. She kept her gaze sharp, every shadow a possible threat. Twice she thought she glimpsed riders far off, but when she blinked they were gone, swallowed by the shimmer of distance. By the time the trading post came into view, her jaw ached from clenching. A squat building of timber and stone, it huddled against the plain as though braced for assault. Smoke rose from the chimney, and a handful of horses were tied outside. She dismounted, tied her mule, and stepped inside. Heat and the stink of unwashed bodies struck her first. Men lounged by the counter, cards in hand, whiskey in tin cups. Their eyes snapped to her the moment she entered. She felt the weight of their stares, the curl of their smirks. "Well, if it ain't the little widow," one drawled, though she had never been wed. Laughter followed, sharp and mean. She ignored it, moved straight to the counter. "I need bandages," she told the storekeep, a gray man with a nose bent from too many breaks. "Salt. Dried meat if you got it." He narrowed his eyes. "Bandages, huh? Ain't often you need them, less you got someone to bind." His gaze flicked to the rifle slung across her back, then to the mud splattered up her skirts. "Who you tending, girl?" She stiffened. "Myself. Ain't your concern." The men behind her chuckled, more likely patching up some redskins she found. Her heart lurched, but she kept her face stone still. "Sell me what I asked, or I'll take my coin elsewhere." "There ain't no elsewhere," the keep said flatly. Yet, after a moment, he turned, gathered what she asked, dropped it heavy on the counter. $2. She slid the coins over, snatched the goods, and turned to leave. A hand shot out, blocking her path. One of the card players, lean and sharp-eyed, grinned down at her. "Now, what would a slip like you be doing with bandages, if not nursing something best left dead?" Her breath caught. The room went still. She met his gaze, jaw tight, and spat, "Move." For a heartbeat, he didn't, and she felt the cold rush of fear down her spine. Then he laughed, stepped aside with a mocking bow. "Run on home, little savior." She shoved past, out into the morning glare, her face hot, hands trembling though she kept them hidden. She mounted her mule, rode hard until the post was far behind. The words followed her like thorns. By the time she reached the shack, her nerves were raw. She found the chief awake, propped weakly on an elbow. His eyes tracked her every move as she set down the supplies, boiled water, prepared broth. She fed him slowly, spoon to lips, and though he grimaced, he swallowed. His gaze never wavered from her face. "You don't understand me," she said softly, almost to herself. "But I reckon you know I could have left you. Maybe should have." He reached weakly, touched her wrist, murmured something low. She caught only one word, repeated with quiet insistence. She did not know it, but the sound of it sent a shiver down her back. That night, as the sky bled to dusk, she stepped outside for wood. The air was still, heavy with the scent of wet earth. She bent to gather kindling and froze. A rider sat his horse at the edge of the rise, silhouetted against the last red light. He did not move. She straightened, heart hammering, rifle in hand. The rider eased forward, slowly, until she saw his face painted in streaks of white and red. Young, eyes hard as flint. He stopped within bowshot, raised his hand not in peace but warning. His gaze flicked past her shoulder to the shack to the man inside. She lifted her rifle, leveled it steady despite the tremor in her chest. They stared across the distance, the world holding its breath. Then a sound came from the shack. The chief's voice, weak but commanding, calling out in his tongue. The young warrior's eyes widened. He answered in the same language, sharp, urgent. The chief replied, though his words broke with weakness. The rider lowered his bow. For a moment longer he studied her, expression unreadable. Then he wheeled his horse and vanished over the rise. She stood shaking, rifle still raised though the threat was gone. Slowly she lowered it, turned back to the shack. Inside, the chief had collapsed against the cot, spent from the effort. She knelt beside him, pressed the back of her hand to his brow. Fever still burned. They know you're here, she whispered, and now they know I'm with you. That night she could not sleep. Every creak of would set her nerves alight, every whisper of wind a phantom hoofbeat. She sat by the fire, rifle across her knees, watching the chief's chest rise and fall. Once his eyes opened, found hers in the glow, and she thought she saw gratitude there, or perhaps warning. She could not tell. The next day passed in uneasy quiet. She tended him, fed him broth, changed his bandages. His strength returned slowly. By evening he could sit upright without swaying, could speak more words, though she caught only fragments. She learned his name then, though the shape of it was strange on her tongue. He repeated it until she tried, until he nodded satisfied. But peace was a thin veil. As the sun fell, she stepped outside and saw them, torches glowing along the ridgeline, a dozen at least, flickering like angry stars. Her breath caught. The tribe had come. She backed toward the door, eyes locked on the firelit figures watching from the hills. The night hummed with silence, broken only by the crackle of distant flame. She gripped her rifle until her knuckles whitened, heart pounding so loud she feared it would carry them. Inside, the chief shifted, tried to rise. She turned, hurried to his side, pressed him back down. No, she hissed, though fear strangled her voice. They're here. Your people. If they find me. He touched her hand, murmured something low, steady, as if to calm her. But she could not be calmed. Her breath came sharp, her chest tight. She moved to the window, peered out again. The torches burned steady, unmoving, waiting, watching. She returned to the chair, rifle across her knees, eyes darting between a man she had saved and the fires that marked the hills. Dawn felt an eternity away. By the time the last log collapsed to ash, she knew one truth as cold as the night pressing in. She had chosen to save him, and in doing so she had drawn the eyes of a whole people to her door. Whether they came in gratitude or vengeance, she would learn soon enough. And as the torches flared brighter against the dark, she braced herself for the answer. The sun rose over the plains with a red fire in its belly, as though the earth itself knew something final was waiting on the horizon. Clara leaned on the fence she had mended just yesterday, the same fence that had stood in defiance of wind, storm, and hunger, though never in her life had she expected what she saw now. From the east came a line of riders, slow but steady, their silhouettes black against the morning blaze. The grass bent under their horses' hooves, and the still air carried the sound of many bells, many voices, and the steady beat of hooves that felt like thunder crawling closer with every breath. It was not a band of raiders, nor a hunting party. It was a procession. Men, women, and children rode and walked, the Cheyenne people moving in silence, save for the low chant of a song that rose and fell like wind through canyon stone. Clara felt her breath catch in her throat. She gripped the fence rail, her knuckles white against the weathered wood. She had saved the fallen chief with no thought of reward, only because his blood had stained her soil and his breath had rattled with death. But this sight was unlike anything her heart was prepared to meet. Behind her, the cabin door creaked open. Little Sam rubbed his eyes with fists still swollen from sleep, while Anna clutched the wooden doll Clara had carved for her last winter. The children pressed against her skirts, sensing the weight of the moment even before words could shape it. "What do they want, Ma?" Sam whispered. Clara could not answer. For all her stubbornness, all the nights she had faced down hunger and the cold claw of loneliness, this was something she could not name. Her gaze fixed on the elder riding at the front, his posture tall despite his years, a long feather trailing from his hair, and a blanket draped across his shoulders. His face, carved by time, carried both solemnity and dignity. And beside him, her heart leapt into her throat, the chief she had saved, his wounds bound but his strength returning. He sat upright, his eyes sharp as a hawk's. The procession halted before her fence. Dust rose and lingered in the morning air, curling around horses and feet, veiling them in a haze that made the moment feel like dream or legend. Then, without a word, the elder dismounted. He walked to her fence and laid something upon it. Bundles wrapped in hide, strings of beads, carved bone ornaments that caught the rising sun. One by one, others followed. Some placed pelts, others laid weapons, knives with bone handles, bows strung with sinew. Children brought baskets of food, dried meat and corn. Women carried blankets, woven with patterns that spoke of stories older than memory. In silence, they covered her fence with gifts until the wood beneath vanished, until the humble barrier of her land gleamed like an altar draped with honor. Clara's throat burned. She shook her head, stepping back, hands raised as though to refuse. I can't take this," she whispered. Her voice broke against the vast silence. "I only did what was right. That's all." The elder raised his hand for quiet, though the people had not spoken a word. His eyes locked with hers, dark and deep as a winter well. Then he spoke, his voice carrying the cadence of earth itself. "You gave life when death had claimed him. Our chief breathes because of you. A gift cannot be refused, for it is not yours to decide. It is ours to give." The words rolled over her, heavy and undeniable. Clara pressed her hand to her chest, the rapid beat of her heart almost painful. Anna tugged at her skirt, whispering, "They're thanking you, Ma. Don't cry." But tears burned her eyes all the same. She had lived years where no one came to her door. No hand reached to lift her burden, no neighbor offered kindness. She had built walls of labor and silence, keeping her children safe in a world that had no room for widows. And now, before her, a people she had been told to fear covered her fence with gifts, so rich they could have paid off her debts twice over. Still, not all eyes in the procession carried peace. Clara caught the hard stare of a younger warrior, his jaw tight, his hand resting on the hilt of his knife. Resentment flickered in his gaze, resentment that she, an outsider, had become part of their story. She understood then that this moment carried more than gratitude. It carried the weight of their tribe's judgment, of bonds that could fracture or hold. The elder turned slightly, gesturing for the chief to come forward. The man dismounted with care, his steps firm, but not yet steady. When he stood before Clara, silence deepened until even the horses seemed to still. His voice was low, deliberate, his English broken but clear. "You gave me back the fire. My people see me because of you. If ever shadow falls upon your house, we will stand." Clara swallowed, her lips trembling. "I only did what any soul should," she whispered, but the words felt hollow beside the gravity of his vow. Behind them, the younger warrior shifted, his voice sharp. "She is not of us. She is pale skin. Why should we tie our honor to her fence?" His words rippled through the gathered, some nodding, others murmuring discontent. The elder's gaze did not waver. He looked at Clara, then at his people. "The earth does not choose who it gives life to. The river does not choose who may drink. She chose life over death. That is the way of honor. Yet even as he spoke, Clara knew the storm was not ended. Gratitude had drawn them here, but fear and pride could turn it. She felt it in the eyes fixed on her children, in the restless shifting of hooves, in the taut silence stretched thin as a bowstring. Sam pressed closer to her side. "Ma," he whispered, "are they going to take us?" Her hand rested on his head. "No, boy," she murmured, though her own certainty wavered. The elder lifted his hands, and the people began to sing again, a low chant that pulsed with rhythm, voices blending until the very ground seemed to hum. It was not a song of war, but of binding, of memory, a song that folded her into its cadence, whether she wished it or not. Clara closed her eyes, and for a heartbeat, she felt the walls she had built inside herself tremble. When the song ended, the elder stepped back. The gifts gleamed along her fence, a burden of honor too heavy to lift, too sacred to return. The chief bowed his head once, then remounted his horse with the aid of his kin. Slowly, the procession turned and began to move away, leaving her yard silent once more, save for the ragged breath in her chest and the distant thunder of their retreating hooves. Clara stood frozen, the children pressed close, the fence transformed into something holy. She thought of the years of hunger, of scraping by, of nights staring into the dark with no one to hear her prayers. And now, this wild, impossible honor laid upon her shoulders. But deep within, beneath the awe and trembling, she felt a seed of dread. Gratitude this powerful was never without cost. Already, she knew whispers would carry across the plains, settlers who'd sneer at her for consorting with natives, men who'd see her gifts not as honor but as spoils worth stealing. She looked at her children, then at the glittering fence, and her jaw hardened. The story was not finished. This was only its beginning. The wind rose, rattling the gifts, making them sing with the soft clink of beads, the rustle of hides, the whisper of feathers. Clara straightened, wiping her tears, her eyes narrowing toward the horizon. Whatever was coming, she would meet it as she always had, head high, heart fierce, hands steady. And though she did not know it yet, the vow given that morning would draw shadows from every corner of the frontier, testing not only her strength but the fragile bond between her world and theirs. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across her yard, and Clara turned back toward her cabin. The gifts gleamed in the light, both a blessing and a warning, and she felt the story of her life shift, like a river forced into new channels. The day had begun with silence, but now it roared with promise and peril alike. And the fence that once marked the limits of her lonely world had become something else entirely, the line upon which the fate of many would soon balance. The night broke open with the sound of gunfire. It wasn't close at first, just faint cracks rolling down the valley like thunder over the ridges, but to Anna, sitting upright by the fire outside the elder's lodge, it might as well have been at her ear. She froze, the ladle in her hand trembling, stew dripping back into the pot. The old man stirred beside her, the firelight cutting deep grooves across his weathered face. His eyes opened, not startled, but sharp, measuring. "They've come sooner than I reckoned," he murmured in a low voice. His words carried no fear, only the weight of knowing. Anna's chest tightened. Her eyes darted toward the shadowed line of cottonwoods edging the village, where every flicker of torchlight could be mistaken for moving men. "You mean the ranchers?" The elder gave a small nod, pulling the blanket tighter around his shoulders. "Men who fear what they do not understand come quick to burn it away." He coughed, a dry rattle that bent his thin frame. Before Anna could reply, a horse clattered into the clearing. It was Little Hawk, his dark braids snapping against his shoulders as he dismounted. Sweat ran down the animal's flanks, and dust smeared his face. He didn't waste words. "They're coming from the West Ridge. Maybe 20, maybe more. They ride hard." His gaze swept over Anna, then dropped to the elder. "We cannot meet them here, not with women and children unguarded." The elder's eyes lifted to the stars, as though weighing their counsel. "And yet, if we flee, they will burn what we leave. Anna felt the earth tilt beneath her. Just hours ago, she'd still been half an outsider here, the orphan girl who'd stumbled into their lives, carrying more stubbornness than sense. Now, with one horseman's warning, she was part of a storm she couldn't step away from. "I can help," she said, before fear had time to choke her throat. The words came out steadier than she expected. "I know how they ride, how they think. They'll expect you to scatter." Little Hawk's eyes narrowed at her. Distrust still lingered between them, sharp as flint, but he didn't dismiss her. Instead, he looked back at the elder. "What would you have us do?" The old man pushed himself upright with painful slowness, his cane biting into the dirt. "Hold the line," he said simply, but not with anger, with strength. "Enough to show them we do not bow, but not enough to spill blood that cannot be washed away." Anna felt her pulse surge. His words were clear enough. Stand, but do not start the killing. That restraint would fall heavy on warriors who had seen too much of both. Before the elder could rise, Anna reached out and steadied his arm. "You shouldn't be out there," she whispered. He looked at her, and for the briefest breath his eyes softened, almost like a grandfather's might. "Child, it was not your place to save my life. Yet you did. Tonight, it is not my place to stay hidden." A shout went up at the far edge of camp. Horses, hooves pounding hard. The men had arrived. Warriors poured from their lodges, some half-dressed, some painted for battle, weapons flashing in the firelight. Women gathered the little ones, shepherding them toward the shelters carved into the hillside. The air grew thick with the smell of smoke, sweat, and rising panic. Anna's heart hammered as she found herself pressed between Little Hawk and the elder. They walked forward together toward the open ground beyond the cottonwoods, where the night suddenly blazed alive with torchlight. The ranchers came into view, 20 at least, just as Little Hawk had said. They looked ragged and mean, faces pinched from drink and dust, rifles slung low, pistols shining in the flames. At their front rode a man Anna recognized, even in the dark, Silas Crow. Her stomach dropped. Silas was a name that carried weight across the frontier, though not the kind spoken with respect. A cattleman with more land than conscience, more hired guns than neighbors, and a cruelty that never needed excuse. He'd whipped her once years ago when she'd been caught stealing bread outside his barn. The memory of the lash burning across her back made her grip her shawl tighter. "Bring out the elder," Silas bellowed, reining his horse hard, eyes sweeping the crowd. "We've come for the thief who steals cattle and land that ain't his." His grin split wide, yellowed teeth gleaming. "Hand him over, and maybe we let the rest of you scatter." The warriors stirred, their low growls carrying on the wind. Little Hawk stepped forward, but the elder lifted a hand, stilling him. Slowly, leaning on his cane, he walked ahead. Anna's breath caught as she saw how small he looked before the torch-bearing riders, yet how steady. "You call me thief," the elder said, voice calm, though age had thinned it. "But it is you who take what cannot be yours. The rivers, the hills, the breath of the earth. We have harmed none. We have only lived." Silas spat into the dirt. "Spare me your talk, old man. You harbor strays, you steal stock, and you stir up trouble where there don't need be any. Tonight I end it." He lifted his rifle. Everything in Anna screamed at once. She lunged forward before thought could stop her, putting herself between the elder and the barrel leveled at his chest. Gasps rippled through the gathered crowd. "Silas Crow!" she shouted, her voice cutting sharp into the night. "You'll shoot him, but you'll answer for it. These people are not thieves. They're not your cattle to drive." Her words shook, but her stance held. "I know you. I know what you've done, and I won't let you do it here." Silas blinked, as if a ghost had stepped into his path. Recognition dawned slow across his features, then curled into a sneer. "Well, I'll be damned. The orphan rat. Thought you'd have frozen or star by now. Instead, you're playing the savior, standing with these redskins." Anna's face burned, but she didn't move. Behind her, she felt the elder's faint, steady presence like an anchor. Little Hawk's voice rang out, fierce and sharp. "You will not touch her. You will not touch him. You'll ride back the way you came." Silas laughed, the sound ugly. You think 20 guns turn back from a handful of painted boys and a girl too stupid to keep her mouth shut? He raised his rifle higher. For a heartbeat, time stopped, the torches flickered, horses stamped, the night held its breath. Then, with a speed Anna hadn't thought possible for his age, the elder raised his cane and drove it into the dirt with a crack like thunder. The sound startled the horses, sending them dancing sideways. The warriors used that instant to raise their bows, their rifles, their voices, an unyielding wall of defiance. The standoff thickened, stretched thin as glass. One wrong twitch and it would shatter into blood. Anna's pulse roared in her ears. She turned her eyes back on Silas, forcing her voice through the storm. If you shoot him, you'll start a war you can't finish. You'll see fire on every ridge and lose more than you ever hoped to gain. Silas's smile faltered. For the first time, doubt cut through his drunken bravado. His men shifted, uneasily, murmurs spreading. None of them had expected this. The old man standing tall, the orphan girl defying them, the tribe unbroken. The elder spoke again, his voice carrying, soft but iron-bound. Go home. Tell your children you rode against us, and we did not fall. Tell them we wished you no harm, even as you came with fire. The silence stretched, broken only by the hiss of torches and the restless stamping of horses. Silas's jaw worked, fury and pride warring in his face. Finally, with a curse, he yanked his reins. We're done here. He spat once more, then wheeled his horse around. One by one, the ranchers turned and followed, their torches dwindling into the dark until only smoke hung in the air. Anna's knees gave way, and she sank to the earth, trembling from the storm that had passed so close she could taste its ash. Little Hawk stood rigid beside her, chest heaving, fist still clenched around his rifle. Slowly, he turned to look at her. You stood where no one else would, he said, his voice rough but edged with something new, respect perhaps, or wonder. The elder lowered himself to a seat on a nearby stone, his cane across his lap. His face bore the lines of exhaustion, but his eyes gleamed. It was not anger that turned them, he said softly. It was courage. The courage of one who carries no name but still carries truth. Anna looked down at her hands, still shaking. For the first time in years, she felt something swell in her chest that had been missing since childhood. Belonging. Not given but earned. The night settled back into quiet. But none who stood there would ever forget what had almost been and what had not.